Just a quick reminder, this podcast may contain general advice, but it doesn't take into account your personal circumstances, needs, or objectives. The scenarios and stocks mentioned in this podcast are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a recommendation to buy, hold, or sell any financial products. Read the relevant PDS, assess whether that information is appropriate for you, and consider speaking to a financial advisor before making investment decisions. Past performance is no indicator of future performance.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 6 of Stocks Neat, a Forager Funds podcast where we talk the world of stock markets and whiskey. Back in the studio today with me, or the Darlinghurst basement studio as it is Gareth Brown, portfolio manager on our international fund. Gareth, Chloe filled in for you last month. I hope you're going to bring a better appreciation of whiskey than she did.
I'm not likely to spit it out anyway. Hello, everyone. Hi, Steve.
On today's agenda, Gareth's going to give us a quick introduction to the whiskey he's brought along today. We're going to talk about the coming electric vehicle wave here in Australia after a couple of trips overseas. We're going to have another rant on stock-based comp, which is something that we've already done in a previous version of this podcast, but the world is changing, and we're going to have another chat about that today. And we'll finish up with a few interesting things that I've been reading around the traps. Gareth, tell us what you've brought along today.
Yeah, it's another one of my society whiskies. This is from the Single Malt Whisky Society based in Scotland. It's probably the last one of these I'll do for a while because I think it's nice to try things that are available in bottle shops for everyone. But I went on a camping trip over the weekend with two of my brothers plus one of my old schoolmates, and it was a beautiful spot. And I got some nice photos of it, so I thought I'll bring it in for you to try. I was sitting on top of a hill overlooking a stream in the snowy mountains, beautiful weather, and I think I was a bit. My opinion of it might be a little bit distorted. I think I could have been drinking Black Douglas and it would have been fine. So I'm interested in your opinion. This is a Speyside whiskey. It's first refill, bourbon barrels, 8 years old. So it was distilled in early 2012 and went into a bottle in 2020. I got my hands on it in the last few years, and give it a try. It's got quite a sweet profile in my opinion. It's not as sweet as the grain whiskey we tried a couple of episodes ago. It doesn't taste like fairy floss, but it's got a maple syrupiness to it, and it's not a burn. It doesn't burn much at all, considering it's 60% alcohol. Yours to try.
Looking forward to it. We'll come back with some taste testing later in the episode, but thanks for bringing along one of your special whiskies. There's actually a photo up on my Twitter account at Forager Steve of the place where Gareth was camping and the whiskey bottle in the foreground. Very beautiful part of Australia. Gareth, we've both been overseas recently after a long stint of not going anywhere, and something that you came back talking a lot about was also something I noticed in London. I actually almost got run over 3 times by taxis in London because they've converted most of the fleet over there to electric. The sound around the streets was really, really noticeable. The buses are all electric. Half the cars seem to be electric in London, and the taxis, they sneak up on you and you don't even see them coming. So a health warning for people that are heading there. But you had a similar experience in Europe and I guess opened your eyes a little bit to where we are in the world.
Yeah, there's a big change coming, and I think it's really important. From an Australian perspective, it's easy to miss, is what is my chief point there. You know, you and I have been going to Oslo a couple of times over the years, and as long ago as 2017, I was blown away by how many Teslas there are on the streets of Oslo. So it's not like electric vehicles are new to us, but that's a very rich country. There was some huge incentives for people to get electric vehicles in Norway. What was interesting about this trip, having not been to Austria and Central Europe for almost 3 years, is that revolution is really happening in Central Europe, in Germany, in Austria, in the UK. My brother and sister-in-law have bought an electric vehicle. One of my wife's best friends has bought an electric vehicle. This has all sort of happened on the hush. We didn't even know people were doing it. The town that my wife grew up in has a bunch of charging stations put in. That I think they've got more charging stations in this little town with 5,000 people than we have in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. It's a really big change there. And then I went to the UK with work, and a few years ago, all the ads were around car financing, and now they're all around vehicles, and nearly always the electric vehicle option. That seems to be the banner thing that all the big automakers are advertising there.
So what percentage of new car sales over there would be electric now versus
So
old
the
petrol?
broader stats here, the middle of the road important European countries, so France, United Kingdom, those big sort of Central European, and Austria is the same. It's around 20% now. So 1 in 5 new cars is either a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid. So that excludes hybrids that are not plug-in. So they're 1 car in 5 in sort of middle Europe now. Sweden, 45%, almost 1 in 2. Denmark is about a third, 35% electric vehicle. So this is new car stats, obviously. It doesn't apply to the whole car park yet. That's going to take 10, 12 years to happen. But we've seen a big push on infrastructure in Europe and a big push on incentives, and it's really, really hitting the road now there over there. And it's a massive change from 3 years ago, in my opinion.
So one of the things people have talked a lot about here is living in a city suburb like we're in at the moment. Not many people have car spaces. Are you seeing infrastructure just on the streets over there, all over the place, that people are plugging cars in?
So my brother and sister-in-law don't have the off-street parking. Very few people do in Vienna. Most people live in apartments. You park your car on the street. There's a charging station around the corner from them. There's a few charging stations that are free. Most of them you pay for, but you pay a few dollars and it charges sort of overnight for most of them. A few euros. But if you're driving from Vienna to Salzburg and you need a high-speed charge, that's going to be more expensive, but still cheaper than filling a tank of gas. Petrol, I should say.
We've just had a election here in Australia on the weekend, and climate change was one of the factors that people were talking about a lot, particularly in wealthier electorates where they didn't feel like the Liberal Party was representing their interests. I think we ended up with 9 independents, and the counting's not finished yet, going into the lower house, and a lot of them on an agenda of climate change policy. We're clearly going to see something significant in this next edition of the government. What do you think it means here? What needs to happen for that percentage to increase
I
dramatically?
think the charging stations issue needs to happen. So that's locally for people that don't have, off-street parking, for example, but also, as you're trying to connect cities like Sydney and Melbourne. So like something that dawned on me the other day, if you're trying to drive from Newcastle to Canberra on the motorways, there's a petrol station at Wyong, which is on the Central Coast, and then there's nothing until you're on the Sydney motorways, and then there's nothing unless you get off the Sydney motorways, and then there's Pheasant's Nest, which is almost sort of Southern Highlands. So you've got to get from Wyong to the Southern Highlands through a 5 million metropolis without any chance to fill up. Now, you can't leave electricity infrastructure at those 2 points and that's it. You need to have a lot more infill. And, just to clarify here, so Europe's up in that 20% market. 20% of the market is now electric. China's 13. We're at 2. And it's growing because that was 2% for 2021. It was 0.8 the year before. So it's growing quickly. But there's a big job here to make make the infrastructure that makes this useful. The other thing is potentially on incentives. So, one of the reasons it is taking off in Austria, for example, is if you get a corporate car, there's no FBT equivalent on electric vehicles. So you can effectively use pre-tax dollars to fund your electric vehicle. And all that stuff will start off big, and all those subsidies will slowly dissolve away to nothing. But it helps you, you can take a lease on one of these things. Then you don't have to take the risk around the battery not working properly, which is the most expensive part to fix. So there's a lot of things that de-risk it for the average person, that sort of take a bit of government involvement. And if we're serious about joining the rest of the world on this, I think we will need to do some of that stuff.
And I guess one benefit of us being a long way behind is that they can look at what's working and not working overseas and cherry pick some of those things. Absolutely. I said I think it was on a Livewire video, that this rout in growth stocks and the bursting of what was very clearly a bubble over the past few years my view was it was not going to be over until Tesla was less than $200 a share. That was my poster child for what was going on. It's come halfway there, but I mean, are there things that you're thinking about from an investment markets perspective here that capitalize on this?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Tesla, you got people have an opinion that it's worth noting in Europe, this is being driven by the traditional OEMs. So people are buying Hyundai electric vehicles and they're buying German auto EVs, and it's not just a Tesla story by any stretch. Where it sort of hits the road for us, if you excuse the pun, is Linamar. We own a tier one automotive parts manufacturer, so mostly they craft product that they sell to the Fords and the GMs and the Mercedes of the world. 5 years ago, you would look at this business and say, okay, the internal combustion engine will phase out over 10, 15, 20 years. What does that cash flow look like for Linamar? I'm not sure that it's going to survive in a world of electric vehicles. How much cash can we get out of the traditional part of the business? By last year, 20% of their new order book was electric vehicles. So, almost at the same level of that European market. So as they take orders from OEMs to make stuff over the next 5 years for some new line, 1/5 of it was electric vehicles. In the first quarter of this year, that was 75% EVs. Now, that's going to be a very noisy series. The average for 2022 will be lower than that, almost guarantee. But they are making the transition. So an important question mark for us is slowly disappearing. So that's just sort of one place. And I think if you want to be involved in this automotive space, you absolutely have to adapt to this. It's where it's going, at least current trajectory. There's potentially hydrogen behind it. There are some question marks around battery vehicles. So there's access to lithium. Can we possibly scale it so that we're doing 50, 70 million cars a year? Can we make enough batteries? And genuinely, is the all-in greenness of these things as they appear to be? And there's a whole bunch of questions around that. But that is where we're seeing that shift in real time.
Especially in a country like Australia, where we haven't done much to transition the source of the energy away from coal yet. I mean, it is growing rapidly as well, the particularly wind in this country. And my hometown of Wellington's got an enormous solar farm outside town there that is generating enough electricity to power the whole of Dubbo, which is a city of 50,000 people. Now, you don't have the grid stability for it to actually power Dubbo, but there's enough electricity coming from that farm.
So two things about that. Like, even if you run EVs off old energy, they don't lose, they don't waste a lot of energy. So even if it's a slightly dirtier fuel than oil, it can be greener. The other thing here is that a big electric vehicle car park is a store of energy. So it actually helps a lot of green energy production, because you've got somewhere to put that energy when it comes in at an inopportune time, because people have got their cars plugged in.
Yeah, the actual build of an electric vehicle, though, is a very energy-intensive process itself.
And environmentally questionable still.
The carbon graphite that you need to make the batteries and things is a very, very energy-intensive thing as well. So hopefully that stuff comes down over time as well, that you're measuring the total carbon footprint of what's going on. But it is coming. I think a couple of, adjacent things to think about as well is all of this infrastructure. And ServiceStream and ASX, this company, has been talking for a few years about the rollout of these charging stations. It's going to require a lot of maintenance. It's not going to be a great business where I've got a huge competitive advantage, but they might be some nice, ServiceStream's got a pretty nice business just maintaining mobile phone towers, for example. Maintaining that electricity network would be an interesting little business as well. And maybe I hadn't actually thought about this, but when you started mentioning the fleet companies, if there is some sort of tax policy to encourage leasing over owning of these types of cars, you've got some very good businesses here in Australia already in SG Fleet, and a couple of other listed companies here that I think would benefit a lot from more people leasing through them, and they're good businesses to start with.
I wouldn't dwell on it, but there's also the risk that we get this wrong. I mean, we don't make cars in this country anymore. The rest of the world is transitioning to different fuel sources for vehicles. We sort of have to get on board. We can be last. It's not going to be the end of the world. They will be making internal combustion engines for a long time. But as as all the automakers move towards EVs and they view their old internal combustion engine drivetrains as a cash cow, we're sort of a little bit exposed there if we're the only people in the world that are not transitioning.
Yeah, we'll be digging lots of lithium out of the ground if nothing else. Our commodities industry is likely to benefit. I'm sure people might be actually thinking about that sector as a beneficiary here. It's got a huge amount of optimism about it at the moment in terms of where share prices are at. A lot of execution risk, I think, around expanding these mines. But
one more point. The other thing is that all this was in train before Russia invaded Ukraine, right? Like that, I kind of forgot to make that point before, but the oil price has responded hard here, and all this was already in train. Like it is accelerating further from here, is my guess.
Stay tuned, we'll be back in just a sec. Are you a long-term investor with a passion for unloved bargains? So are we. Forager Funds is a contemporary value fund manager with a proven track record for finding opportunities in unlikely places. Through our Australian and international shares funds, investors have access to small and mid-sized investments not accessible to many fund managers, in businesses that many investors likely haven't heard of. We have serious skin in the game too, meaning we invest right alongside our investors. For more information about our investments, visit foragerfunds.com. And if you like what you're hearing and what we're drinking, please like, subscribe, and pass it on. Thanks for tuning in. Now, back to the chat.
All right, we'll move on to one of our favourite topics, which is share-based compensation. We had a rant when we were both in Chicago a couple of months ago recording our podcast. A little bit of background for people that are not familiar with this concept. It's almost uniquely US, but a lot of US companies issue enormous amounts of shares, particularly high growth and startup companies. They're issuing shares to their staff every year as a form of compensation. They are reporting, when they announce their results, firstly, adjusted EBITDA as a metric, which doesn't include that number at all. And then they're reporting what they call adjusted earnings, which is adding back that stock-based compensation to the earnings and not accounting for the enormous dilution of shares that come with it. So we've had an issue with this for years. I think because the market and investors have been focusing on this adjusted EBITDA number, companies have been able to get away with it. They've been doing more and more and more.
I think we've been acutely aware of it, but still fallen victim to it. I mean, Twitter for me is a great example. I really expected that to normalize and calm down and contract, and they once we started owning that stock, they've been giving more and more of the farm away.
Yeah, we'll come to this a bit later in terms of how the companies do react, because what we saw in the bubble was an acceleration of it, not a decline. As these companies got bigger, they started doing more and more of it. But there's a really, I think, interesting email that Dara Khosrowshahi, who's the CEO of Uber, sent to all of his employees a couple of weeks ago. And I'll just read this out. But he said, channeling Jerry Maguire, we need to show them, he's talking about investors, we need to show them the money. We've made a ton of progress in terms of profitability, setting a target for $5 billion in adjusted EBITDA in 2024, but the goalposts have changed. Now it's about free cash flow. So we've been carrying on about adjusted EBITDA for years as well. At least one company in Uber is getting the message that you actually need to worry about profits here. EBITDA has a lot of things. It's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, earnings before a lot of things, that the market does care about all of those things that come out underneath, and that they as a company need to start focusing on that as well. We've been hearing that a lot. Yeah. A lot of companies are getting this message about old school concepts like profits actually matter. And we're seeing some shifts in behavior, not everywhere, we're seeing some, but not yet a lot of talk about actually including this stock-based compensation in terms of how they think about the profitability of the business. I know you, Gareth, were, as part of your Flutter research, looking at a company called DraftKings, and I just wanted to talk about some of the extraordinary numbers first and then get onto some of the changes that we're seeing.
Just before, with that Uber, is your understanding of that they focus on free cash flow after stock-based comp?
I would say they're now including CapEx, so we need to generate cash flow, but I'll come back to this.
Okay,
I did not see one mention of per share. He needs to add 2 words to that sentence, and I am fully
to
supportive.
maybe do some really simple accounting concepts for people or around that as well. So
this will be good fun. Accounting
um,
concepts on a podcast.
we own shares in a company called Flutter, and their most important asset is a online sports betting and iGaming platform in the US called FanDuel. And FanDuel is the number one in most states where it operates, and there's new states opening up all the time. We think it's going to be the number one player nationwide. We're going to make good money out of it. So I spent a lot of time looking at its competitors. So the two key ones are DraftKings, which has a very similar history to FanDuel. Both were fantasy sports leagues. So they had a whole bunch of people that used to fantasy bet on sports, and then all of a sudden the states made it legal and they could bet real money, and bang, like that. It was a beautiful pre-qualified list of clients. And then on the other side, you had BetMGM, which has come more from the casino world. So let's ignore BetMGM for now. DraftKings is the chief competitor to FanDuel in online sports book betting, and with that very similar history. And sort of 2021 and now in 2022, FanDuel is going to lose about 15 cents on the dollar of revenue overall from the revenue it gets from its clients. And the reason that is they're making money in some of the more established states, but there's this huge marketing push in the new states. So just ignore that for now. This is going to be a highly profitable business as time goes by, but they're losing about 15 cents in the dollar. So they get 100 cents of revenue. They spend 115 cents in expenses, and there's not much stock-based comp. I think from the whole company point of view, it's 1 to 2% of revenue, and it's not. I don't know if that's actually FanDuel or other parts of the business. Chief competitor, DraftKings, it's about typically in most states about 2/3 the size in terms of the betting handle and the revenue. They are losing about 50 cents, so not 1.5 but 50 of cash on their business. So 100 cents of revenue from the client, they're losing this. They've got $1.50 of expenses, so they're reporting minus 50 cents of cash earnings.
And again, they're saying more profitable in the more established states. You can see a path to some form of cash profitability there.
Yes, for sure. They are building a valuable business in parts, but they are also giving away 50% of revenue as stock-based comp. So to the extent that they decided not to do that, but to pay their staff in cash instead, their margins would be minus 100%, whereas the competitor FanDuel is minus 15%. So, I'm really confident about the competitive position here. It's one of the reasons why I'm really quite excited about the stock. I can see them building a big lead over their competitors already, but it's a huge giveaway. This is a business that might generate 30 margins if you get to scale and you do really, really well. You might expect to get 30% margins, and I can see FanDuel getting there. I don't really understand how DraftKings intends to get there when they're giving away so much of the farm each year. And I mean, there's an answer to this, which is the guys that run this control 90% of the vote, and they'll do whatever the hell they want. But like the economics of it make no sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, and even if you had a strong view that it was going to tail off at some point in time, it just makes these companies almost impossible to value because we have no idea how many shares are going to be on issue in 5 years' time. And I touched on DocuSign in a previous podcast, but they've increased their shares on issue by 50% over the past 3 years. You can actually, it's a bit of how you account for the cost of these share issuance is a very complicated topic, right? So you see an expense and you go, I'm not really sure whether that's the real economic cost or not, but you can see the share count going up. Right? Yeah. And that's my message to Uber is focus on free cash flow per share.
The count's gone up 50, right? So the staff have walked away with 1/3 of that business for the work they've done in the last 3 years, right? It's not even, it hasn't solved the problem and now it goes away and it's done. They own 1/3 and you own 2/3. You are likely to cop that level of dilution ongoing. They end up with 99% of the economics relatively quickly, right?
And I think it just makes it, you have to assume that, like we're seeing, I think you are seeing a response this is particularly in the US. People care about the share prices over there more than anywhere else in the world. You get European companies that just do whatever they want and don't care. When you talk to US companies, they want to know why you're buying or not buying the shares, and they will actually take their cue from that. And the Uber CEO, he actually got quite a bit of criticism for saying we need to remember that the shareholders own the company, and it's our job to do what they want, not do whatever we want, because there's arguments about stewardship, and they should be trying to grow the value of the business independently. But I think there's more truth to that than most companies like to accept. And in the US, they do respond more. So I think we're already seeing responses to the cash burn side of the equation, which has been rampant as well. I think in some companies we will see them recognize that they need to do something about the stock-based comp as well, or their share price is never going to go up, that people can't invest in it. But interestingly, some of the first reactions from some companies have been in the opposite direction.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about Coinbase now. Is that so Coinbase is an exchange for cryptocurrencies. I think is the best way to describe it. And they issued stock to their staff over the last few years, and their stock price has been absolutely hammered a lot with a lot of other things in that space. And the management's just come out the other day and said, we know this is to staff. We know you've lost a lot of your potential wealth out of this, and we are going to issue more stock-based comp to make up half the difference. So, we've been hammered. You've lost your wealth. So here's the little something extra. While external shareholders are getting absolutely slaughtered. Now they're going to get diluted more aggressively because for reasons that make no sense to me.
I feel like there's still an internal inability to, in the whole sector I'm talking about now, it has been a bubble, and there have been some extraordinary wealth transferences through that bubble from people who provided their capital to staff and people who had the ideas. And money was just being thrown around like nothing I've ever seen. You saw family offices and a lot of people get involved in the venture capital space. Every single second person in Silicon Valley was running a venture capital fund, and there was just so much money going on that lots of crazy fortunes were made. I'm not getting the sense from the outside yet that there's been a recognition that actually this is properly over. You can forget about the 5 years, even there's a lot of, we're back to pre-COVID. There was a tech bubble going on pre-COVID, and there's a lot of silly money being thrown around. So yes, share prices are down a long way. I think there's some really, really interesting opportunities out there. I still don't feel like the people operating in the industry have had their this is actually over moment yet, that people are saying, well, if I don't keep paying all the staff-based comp, I'm going to lose the staff. Well, everyone's going through the same issue right here. Nobody has the money to pay them what they were paying them before.
So I know Twitter's under takeover offer, whether it's going to get executed or not, but I would like to see them lose a chunk of their stuff. I don't think that they've gotten value for that over the last 5 years. I think it is a good thing. There's a lot of talk about whether the market in Silicon Valley is similar to 2000. Obviously, there's some parallels. I'm quite sympathetic to the idea that this is different. These are real businesses now that generate a lot of money, not like back in the early days of the dot-com boom. But I think there's a huge adjustment coming for the staff in Silicon Valley. They've had it too good for too long, and I think there will ultimately be a reappraisal here. But it needs to come from the shareholders. The shareholders need to step up and say this is no longer acceptable. And I think the fact that index funds have owned a lot of these companies over the years has potentially enabled a lot of it.
And look, the share prices get low enough and you start attracting a different type of investor, right, that is coming in with a specific agenda here to change the way it's going on.
You've got to have the control, or else you're going to cop the stock base. There needs to be a change there, or they're not. They are in that vacuum now where they've fallen, but they're not necessarily attracting that new type of investor because that person's sitting here saying, I can't work out intrinsic value. It's too hard.
Yeah, I think there's some very, very valuable revenue streams in the space. Who ends up getting that revenue stream at the end of the day is still a complicated question in a lot of situations. You've already had your taste there, Gareth, but we might just jump back onto the whiskey discussion. I'm going to pour a little bit of water in mine because it is quite high alcohol content. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's about 60% or 59, but it's I think you might have overboarded that. Yeah, I'm interested in Steve's opinion here because as I said, I was sitting up on a nice hillside and it was very enjoyable, but I don't trust my taste buds in such a situation. Too watery.
I didn't put that much in. It's fine. It's good.
He doubled the volume. It was ridiculous.
Tell me what it says on the bottle.
You can read it. It's a bit dark in this room.
I can never. I went to a wine tasting thing once, and they were describing all of these flavors in the wine to me. I can never.
So this was an enjoyable society whiskey. It is not like one of their marquee ones. I think it was bottom of the range sort of price there. As I said, Speyside, 8 years old. It's not a particularly old whiskey. I enjoy it. It's nice.
So the description is a vanilla sponge cake and sultanas soaked in brandy, mixed with cinnamon, nutmeg, swirl of maple syrup, fresh ginger, and sweet tangerines.
Well, I like the name as well. You didn't read that out, eh?
The name is a maple syrup mountain spring.
That's why I took it away camping. So.
Very nice, very enjoyable. What would you, if someone was buying something in a shop and they wanted something similar to that? Is there anything you could recommend? Or
I don't know if I'm the person for it. I mean, as I said, these things come out cask strength. I think that's part of the difference between anything you can get in a Dan Murphy's. It's a Speyside, so a lot of the Speyside blends or the single malts have somewhat similar profile, but nothing comes to mind.
We've talked about some of our earlier podcasts were commercial Speyside whiskies. It's probably my favourite region just for a nice, easy drinking whiskey. We might try and do a really peaty one for one of our. Yeah, we've missed the peaty category, and they're some of my favourites as well. So
I've sort of gone off them over the last 10 years.
If you want to enjoy this one, you either need to sign up or be very nice to Gareth.
Maybe I should introduce this section because we often finish with interesting things you've been reading, and I've been reading a lot of interesting things, but they've just completely fallen out of my head. And so I don't really have a contribution here, but so maybe I can ask you, what have you been reading lately? Is there anything that you think people might find interesting?
Well, fascinating little piece in the Economist edition of May 14 about inflation in Zimbabwe. Very unfortunately for the Zimbabweans, inflation is making a comeback. It was absolutely horrendous over there in 2008, 2009, 2 million% per year of inflation. I've actually got a note somewhere that I bought in Zimbabwe that's got more zeros on it than you can count, but is absolutely worthless in terms of real money. It's a souvenir thing that gets sold over there. So anyway, they went through a whole economic revamp in Zimbabwe, got inflation back down, pegged the currency to the US dollar for a while. The recent guy running the country has gone back to some of the ills of the old ways and decided that the only way to fund the infrastructure spend he wants to do is for the government to print more money, and inflation's taken off again, 160%, the more recent numbers there in Zimbabwe, and everyone who lived through that hyperinflation, not surprisingly, panicking about the value of their money.
So the numbers are pretty tame next to the old numbers, right?
For now. Yeah. There's a really innovative business in this article. There's a company in Harare that is offering annuities, which are retirement investment schemes for people. They're not denominated in Zimbabwean dollars for obvious reasons. They're not even denominated in US dollars. They're denominated in cows. It's a very common form of wealth saving over there that the government can't print more of. And this scheme is you either give them money or you give them a cow yourself, and for the rest of your life you get 5% of the value of a cow into perpetuity, and your wealth is supposed to grow as the cow breeds over time, and they have to take the adjustment off where they keep the cow.
So you get that as well.
But it's actually your retirement fund is literally hitched to cow prices and how many cows are in the herd. But yeah, you get the compounding effect. I assume there's fees.
It's a very nice solution to an unfortunate problem, isn't it? I mean, when you think about the role of money, when you have a sound money, it's this medium of exchange. So, you want a computer, but the computer seller wants a new house, and the house seller wants, food for the table, and the money just sort of flows and helps that happen. Whereas in a world of unsound money, you really need to be more direct. I have a cow, you want a cow, you have a dress that your wife made, we can do a swap.
Yeah.
And there's just much bigger frictional costs in that kind of world. When you have unsound money, you have a lot more frictional costs. And this is sort of, I guess, a nice little neat way to get around it. I guess from a risk perspective, the average person probably would rather a basket of goods than just cows, although I know biltong's very important.
It's just a very traditional store of wealth for them as well. So I think just understanding that as a marketing thing is an interesting sales tool as well, and a really brilliant, innovative product. Our own inflation problems in the Western world at the moment. The Economist article was saying part of the problem is the government keeps spending money and getting the Reserve Bank to issue the currency to finance it. Not too different from what the Western world's been doing over the past couple of years in particular as well, and suffering some of the consequences of that at the moment. One last little thing as well, a quick recommendation of a podcast. If you haven't listened to it already, Liar Liar by the Sydney Morning Herald and 60 Minutes with Kate McClymont. Fantastic podcast.
She's something else, isn't she? Just wonderful.
Interesting story of I won't give it all away, but you've probably read a bit about it in the papers, but Ponzi scheme being run out of Sydney's eastern suburbs.
This is Melissa
Caddick is the woman's name who was running the Ponzi scheme, but they've collected a whole heap of information about her life and some prior frauds that she committed and some of the warning signs that people could have seen. It's a really well done podcast and a fascinating story. So jump onto that one if you haven't already. We'll put links to a couple of things in the show notes for today. And as usual, if you've got any feedback or anything you'd like to see us discuss in the future, feel free to get in touch. Thanks for tuning in.